Okay, hello everyone, how are we all doing today? Welcome back to another episode of Script Apart, a podcast about the first draft secrets of great movies and TV shows. My name's Al Horner, and on today's episode, a moving conversation about an elite tier Pixar classic, featuring for my money one of the most heartbreaking music moments in recent film history. Yes, we're talking all things Coco on today's show with the film's fantastic co-writer, Matthew Aldrich. Directed by past Script Apart guest Lee Unkrich and co-written by Adrian Molina, the 2017 film told the story of Miguel, a young boy voiced by Anthony Gonzalez. Miguel is accidentally transported to the land of the dead, where he seeks the help of his deceased musician great-great-grandfather to return him to his family and reverse their ban on music. It's, in my opinion, one of the richest and boldest mainstream animated movies of all time, confronting ideas around death, legacy, and remembrance. Much like how Inside Out gave parents a framework for talking to their kids about emotions, Coco is renowned today as a text that helps facilitate conversations with children about what it means when someone passes away. In the conversation that you're about to hear, Matthew and I discuss the musical version of the film that was in development before he joined the project. We get into how the film's villain, Ernesto de la Cruz, represents the folly of chasing the wrong sort of remembrance, and you'll hear what makes Remember Me such a beautiful part of Coco. We get into the genesis of that astounding piece of music that lands like a gut punch when you hear it for the final time in Act 3. Thank you to Matthew for being such a great guest, and thank you as ever to our Patreon supporters, without whom Script Apart would simply not be possible. Recently, we began hosting weekly Script Apart writing hours on Patreon. These are 1-hour Zoom hangouts where listeners who themselves are aspiring writers can log on, get an hour of intensive writing done in silence with the Script Apart community, and then we hang out for a little bit afterwards. It's been so great meeting everyone, and we'd love to have you on the next one. Head over to patreon.com/scriptapart if you'd like to sign up. Other perks include ad-free episodes, early access to episodes, and the chance to ask your questions to upcoming guests. All that for the price of a single monthly cup of coffee. Pretty good bargain, if you ask me. That address one more time in case you're interested, patreon.com/scriptapart. Okay, that is all the admin out of the way, so we can dive straight in. This is the wonderful Matthew Aldrich discussing the first draft secrets of Coco. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. You're listening to Script Apart, hosted by me, Al Horner, and produced by Camille Demek. Matthew, so great to have you with us. How's it going today?
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Things are going well. I'm in Oakland, California. It's a beautiful sunny day. We are spared a lot of the sort of heat dome experience that a lot of California is in. So I am counting my blessings here and enjoying the fine afternoon.
It is one of the interesting distinctions between Americans and British people. I can say, as someone who straddles kind of both cultures, in Britain, when it gets hot, we just kind of complain that it's really hot. Whereas you guys have the branding of heat dome. Sounds quite exciting. It sounds like a Mad Max sequel.
It is. I think if you really want to get that kind of bravado around heat, you should really have my mother on the show. She lives in Sacramento, and like, how's the weather there? And she's like, it's fine. It's only 99 today. And so, I'm definitely more of a wuss than she is.
Okay, tell Mrs. Aldrich that we're excited to have her on next week.
Oh, please. I'll pass on her info.
Matt, we're talking today about Coco, which is a movie that 7 years on still reverberates in this huge way. It's beloved as a piece of entertainment, it's beloved as like a milestone in terms of representation, and it's beloved in terms of perhaps giving young audiences a means of understanding and discussing death that doesn't feel so foreboding. Like I always think about how when I was little, the concept of death just terrified me. But in Coco, young audiences today have this film that finds the beauty in death. So yeah, let's begin there, Matt. Like, of all the legacies of your work on this film, is there one that you're most proud of?
Well, I don't know. That's hard to say that it's like that's my legacy because the making of any film, but especially a film at Pixar, is such a team sport. And so I was lucky enough to be brought in at the very beginning of the process. I mean, essentially, like there was sort of a rough pitch, and for a story, but it was a story that we abandoned pretty quickly into the process and wiped the whiteboards clean. And so, yeah, being in one of those rooms when you have a clean whiteboard and you can literally create anything. All you have to guide you is a holiday. It's kind of like, it was a little overwhelming, but it was actually really exciting. So um, that first summer that we were kind of banging out the rough story of what would become Coco. I can't say anything was mine, but here's what happened in that first summer, which is maybe germane and maybe gets to answering your question. Over that first summer, we came up with the ending. The ending is, it's one of those kind of crazy unicorn things. The ending of this movie never changed, like from the first draft to the final film. Like it's the same ending it's always been. In fact, there was one point in the screening process where they tweaked the ending. They tweaked the final scene just a little bit, and I'm not even talking about story. They tweaked like timing on cuts, and it didn't work, and they went back. And so Lee can obviously and probably did talk more in detail about crafting that ending, but the idea that this boy would travel to the land of the dead and bring back a song, bring back a memory that was lost. That was such a, I don't know, it was such a powerful idea to all of us. And the link between music and memory was something that we had done a lot of research around. And I'm really proud of the way that movie wraps up. I think that it does an incredible amount in such a short period of time. And, it's the thing that I think all movies have great endings. I think it's just a really good ending. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah. It was like, what, 7 years ago, and I don't think I've ever quite got over the emotion of that first time in the cinema. I remember, Matt, reading that on one research trip to Mexico as you prepped the film, you met with some older people who were worried that Dia de Muertos and the kind of ideas infused in it, like that notion of talking about lost ones as a means of keeping them alive, these were traditions that they were worried that younger people weren't taking as seriously. Like that was the fear amongst older generations that you met with. When we talk about those, the legacies of the film, do you think Coco helped change that? Have you heard anything to the effect that now perhaps people are engaging more with these traditions because of the film? I mean, I don't know whether that's something you've been privy to. And
No, in Mexico, no, I don't. I haven't been privy to those conversations. What I can say, and what I have observed, is that, well, let me back up. Part of their frustration, with the older generation's frustration and their sort of worry, their hand wringing about whether or not the younger generation would observe these same traditions and remember them in the same way they were remembering their grandparents and great grandparents. Part of that was a frustration that Dia de Muertos was being conflated with Halloween, as Halloween was sort of encroaching as a cultural thing into Mexico from America. Um, it because of their proximity on the calendar and the fact that it involved costuming or things like that. Um, that they were being conflated. And so kids were much more excited about celebrating Halloween than they were about celebrating Dia de Muertos, which is fun and has parades and life and music and all of that stuff. But essentially, it is a fundamentally not a somber situation, but it's heavy. It's a heavy situation, and it's not like, my conversations with some of the younger kids is that they found it really boring. They found it a boring holiday, and uh, so what I have seen, actually, from my point of view here in America and everything, I've actually seen people know that they're two separate holidays now. And I feel like that's a win, even in the stateside. People know about this holiday in a way that I don't think they knew about it before the movie came out. And so if we helped sort of pull those two apart a little bit, if we did a little bit to help that, I think that's a huge gain, because I think that was part of the frustrations for the people I talked to in Mexico.
That idea of remembrance as a form of immortality, Matt, that is such a beautiful idea that I think explains the kind of universal appeal of this story. Like, whatever culture you come from, like, it feels like a truism that as long as we remember someone, they're never truly gone. Um, I guess kind of like tangential to that, I would love to know, Matt, like what you were bringing to the table personally when it came to this story. I mean, I know that Mexico had had a presence in your work before you had written a Pablo Escobar biopic, for example, but nothing came up in my research about your own relationship with death that maybe helped shape Coco. Like, I'm vaguely aware that there were these grandparents of yours who helped inform certain characters, but yeah, I don't know much about your own kind of experience with death and whether there were any kind of past experiences with it that shaped your thinking as you stepped into working on the film. I hope that's not like too morbid a question to ask.
No, no, no. It's not. It's interesting because I consider myself incredibly lucky, and one of the ways I consider myself very lucky is that I didn't have people die on me at a young age. I never really had to contend with that. My grandparents, they died when I was well into adulthood, and I had my own kids. They were great grandparents at that point by the time they passed away. And so I honestly, I can honestly say I didn't think too much about death. And because it felt like something that I had been to a funeral here or there of distant relatives and stuff, but it's not something that I had to contend with on like a personal level. Um, and but I think, look, the family that I come from is sort of a large Italian family. It's a big Catholic kind of thing. Like the time that I've spent in Mexico over the years, traveling for work or for pleasure, I always feel like I kind of recognize everything that's going on. Like I don't know. There's just I've always felt quite at ease. It's not felt like a foreign place at all. So yeah, the character of Abuelita and everything is very much modeled on the initial drafts anyway, were modeled on my grandmother. And then it's always funny, like I wanted to craft this kind of matriarch character who kind of ruled with an iron fist, but was so lovey-dovey with everybody she loved, but she was serious. And so I had her I think in the early draft, I had her brandishing a wooden spoon, because that's something that my grandmother would do. It's something my mother did. And and then some of the it was some of the people on the story team who I can't remember who it was. I think it was Manny or somebody. He was like, "Yeah, a Mexican mother would have a shoe. Like she would," and I was like, "Really?" And like, "Yeah, she would pull off a shoe." And I'm like, "Okay, we'll change it to shoe." So it was this thing of like, I was kind of writing an Italian family, and then they would kind of nudge me in certain ways to be like, this might be a little bit more culturally specific. So it was like I said, it was a team sport in that regard. But as far as the theme of remembering, like, and being remembered, so that was something that like I said, when we cleared the whiteboard, all we had to start with was the holiday, and we kind of asked ourselves, like, okay, we're making a holiday movie. Like, how do you make a holiday movie? It's like if aliens landed and had to make a Christmas movie, and they'd never celebrated Christmas. How would they make a Christmas movie? Well, they would study what are the tenets of Christmas, right? And so you kind of go like, what's the happy ending of a Christmas movie? What's the happy ending of a Thanksgiving movie? Well, it's like a family coming back together, a family that was separated coming back together. You're like, okay, that's probably the airspace that this movie is going to be. We're going to be talking about a fractured family that comes back together. And so then you start to, like I said, you put those pylons in place and you start to build the pier. And then in doing a lot of reading and meetings and talking about the holiday with people who grew up celebrating and everything, we came across this part of the holiday, or part of this sort of the belief that everybody dies a second death. They die a second time when nobody's left on earth to remember them. And that was, in some ways, it was a very beautiful idea, as you're saying, is very resonant and felt very universal. But also it solved like a really key screenwriting problem, which is like, what are the stakes in a movie about dead people? Like that, it was like, aha, like we have life and death stakes again. Like, this is not the afterlife. This is a way station. This is a purgatory, and they are just as scared about what is beyond as we are about what is beyond. And the idea that you could be lost to somebody forever suddenly gave the architecture of the screenplay and the architecture of the drama stakes that we had been kind of like going like, oh, we're making a movie about dead people. Like, if they fall, they're just going to shatter, but then they're going to come back together, and they're going to, we were a little bit in the weeds on what's the danger in this world. So yeah, it was both. It was both it was both a beautiful theme, but like a really like mechanical, helpful solve for us.
Yeah, I can imagine. And you alluded to at the top of our conversation, you alluded to like a version of this film that was kind of thrown out. I've read that there was an iteration of this film in which like an American child learns about his Mexican heritage while dealing with the death of his mother. Was that the version you were talking of there, Matt?
Yeah, that was the version. That was it was very heavy. It was a lot heavier than the movie that we ended up writing and making. But there was a fundamental problem with it. Again, going back to, we're making a movie about a holiday, right? And this movie has to be this movie has to celebrate and uphold the tenets of this holiday. That particular story had a very, yes, it was about a sort of an American kid with who had a mother who was Mexican, and so she passes away, and then he travels with his father to the mother's family down in Mexico to celebrate this holiday, et cetera, et cetera. The ending of that film was very much about, or the ending of that story, I should say, was very much about the boy learning to let go of the mother. And that's a very American idea, right? And in some ways, we're talking about the resonance that this film has with people, but like how it changed me learning about this holiday and learning its tenets. It showed me like that we have this way in this country and in a lot of countries, that the key to grief, that the sort of the finish line of grief, is letting go. And that is not what this holiday is about. Is absolutely about the other thing. So that was really what kind of screeched the brakes on that story, was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're not making a movie about this holiday. We're making a movie that is sort of using this holiday as set dressing. The real win, or the real finish line, is holding on, is being able to remember again, right? So that the original sin of this film, or the story, the original sin of the story of Coco, is that they cut somebody out of their lives. They forcefully forgot someone. That's the original sin. And the movie is not over until that sin is corrected and that person is remembered again. So yeah, it was funny. I remember having a conversation with a woman down there. We were down there for Dia de Muertos, and we were celebrating, sort of visiting with families and talking to them about how they celebrate. And we were at the cemetery with a woman as she was sort of cleaning the graves of her family, and we had spent the afternoon with her, and asking her all kinds of questions about the holiday and everything. And then she stopped and asked us a question. She's like, what do you guys do? Like, what do you do in America when somebody dies? And I was like, well, maybe on the anniversary of the funeral, we'll go back to the cemetery, or, but there's no formal way to remember. Like, I was just sort of describing, sort of like, here's kind of what we do. And her response was, that's so sad. And I was like, you're right. Like, that is really sad. Um, and and so, yeah, the decision to kind of go away from the Americanized story was apparent really early on, like within weeks of my starting. It was like, yeah, this is not going to work.
Was the music component in at that point? Was well, Miguel? I think he was named Marco at that point. Was he a budding musician who was butting against his remaining family who didn't want him to pursue that path?
Yes, he was. That was always part of it, because again, um, you look at, there's lots of stories about people who travel to the land of the dead, right? And there's rules about traveling to the land of the dead. Like, historically, mythologically, there's rules, which mean, like, one of the rules is you can't bring back anybody from the dead. That's unholy. That's just not, it's never going to be right. That's never going to turn out well. You also can't bring back things, objects. You can only bring back knowledge, right? And so Lee, I know he wanted, for a long time, he wanted to make a musical at Pixar. He wanted to make Pixar's first musical. And so that was sort of in the ether as we were crafting this early story. And so again, it was one of those days where you're just like, what can this kid bring back from the land of the dead? And he's got to bring back knowledge. And what can that knowledge be? What if that knowledge is a song? And that's when I was like, okay, wait. Okay, here's how. Here it was like, okay, there's a song, and it was stolen from this guy, and he finds it, he brings it back, and he sings it to his grandmother, and she remembers. Like, it was like, it became this, like, oh, that's what he brings back from the land of the dead. And so the fact that the key that unlocked the final lock was a song, it scratched Lee's itch of like, yeah, and we'll make this a musical. And then we brought Bobby and Kristen on, and it was like, we're doing this. And all of our chips went in on like making this all about the music. There's a documentary, which is really worth watching. It's a documentary about people with Alzheimer's and dementia, who they are given. There was a nonprofit organization that was created that gave them iPods loaded with music from their childhood. And when they listened to it, they would become lucid again. They would start talking, reminiscing, talking about all that. Like, they became present again. And the science of that is that, like, the part of our brains that recognize music are so deep in our brain. It is literally, it's like the last thing that Alzheimer's can reach. So like, people who are like Mama Coco, like, there's still music in there, and you can still reach them through music. And when we watched this documentary, and we saw that, oh, this isn't just sort of a fanciful notion that a song could bring someone back to life. We actually were watching it on this documentary. It was like, yeah, music had to be a part of it. It was in the DNA from the jump.
You're totally right about how intrinsic music is to this movie, how intrinsic it had to be to this story. We've been talking about this idea of remembrance as a means of immortality, Matt. One of the ways in which music becomes this prism for that major theme of the film is in the way that its antagonist is constructed. So, the musician Ernesto de la Cruz. Ernesto is seeking remembrance, but it's the wrong sort of remembrance. He thinks that being remembered through celebrity and fame for his musical talent is the way to go, and that that's going to buy him immortality. But it's a hollow type of remembrance, a hollow type of immortality the film ultimately declares. I hadn't noticed just how brilliantly his arc in the film folds into the major theme of Coco this way till I was preparing for this episode. And I've watched this film so many times. So it's seamlessly done, it's subtly done, and I'm really curious to know like how the character evolved when he came into the fold, and yeah, how you kind of put in place the bait and switch, I suppose, because in the beginning of the movie, you anticipate Ernesto being a good guy. You assume that like Miguel is going to meet Ernesto in the land of the dead. Ernesto is going to teach him to follow his true path and live his music dreams in spite of his family's ban on music. That's, of course, not how it plays out. And instead, we have this story that's a real example of do not meet your heroes. So, yeah, talk to me about all that, Matt. Like, tell me how this character came to be and why it was important that Miguel learned through him that there's a difference between celebrity adoration and the actual adoration, the actual remembrance of being placed on someone's ofrenda.
Yeah. Personal love versus impersonal love, right? Being, and people do make ofrendas to Frida Kahlo, and that exists. And I remember in one fun brainstorming session, we were like, what is Frida Kahlo's, like, does she just like a dump truck full of stuff just like back up to her, her villa in the afterlife because of all the offerings that people have given her, across the country? And it made us sort of think of this like Candyland that Ernesto de la Cruz must live in, you know. And then so we were like, oh well, that would be fun and funny to see. It would be a good set, but it would also be like totally aspirational for a 12-year-old kid who would want all the stuff, like, of course you want all of that stuff. Of course you want, to be loved by your family and adored, right? So it's that sort of difference between, I guess, being loved and being adored. And so the sort of the villainous side um, of that aspect is, or that, argument is being adored. That's sorry, how you take the villain to the nth, where he's willing to actually kill a child so that he can continue to be adored. And again, I love the, we, it's, I don't know, it's like hard to know which came first, but like, we loved sort of the Mexican cinema of the 40s and figures like Pedro Infante and Jorge Negrete and the camp sometimes of those men in those movies. And we just always sort of imagined De La Cruz as being part of that world, one of those guys. And I guess, biographically, I'm from a small town in New Jersey called Freehold, and it's where Bruce Springsteen is from.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, so I would pass Bruce Springsteen's childhood home when we were going to church at St. Rose of Lima, and I knew it was like that's the house he grew up in, and this was in the 80s, and like in the 80s, like the lyrics to Born to Run were on the New Jersey flag at that point. Like it was really it was as Jersey as you could be, and there was a pride that I felt of being sort of from the same town. And I don't know, like I was like, okay, so they're from the same town. Like I could see how that this little kid with a guitar and a dream would stare at the statue of the guy who made it out and really just want everything that guy had. That just felt like something that not only would he want, but we would root for. And that then at the third act turn, we could subvert and say, did you really want this? Like, maybe don't meet your heroes, you know? You know, so that, yeah, that was, yeah, the De La Cruz of it all. He was always just supposed to be, I don't know, he is what Miguel would have turned into had Miguel had not had this experience. He would have left his family, gone on the road, become very successful, been adored, but not loved. That was kind of that's the story math that we were working with.
And was the character of Hector always in the mix? Like, talk me through the sort of evolution of that character and what he represented in terms of what Miguel needed to experience and the journey he was about to go on.
I feel like um, yeah, he was in there from the beginning, or a version of him was in there even from the earlier story, where he was sort of the scrappy ferryman, kind of shepherding this little kid through this strange land, and helping him understand. But I guess when you're sort of laying down the framework for the story, the way I work, I guess, is I'm doing a lot of balancing and counterbalancing. So you have a character like Miguel, who, what does he want to do? He wants to play music, be himself, but he also wants to be famous. He wants to make movies. He wants all the cash and prizes. And what he doesn't want is his family bugging him and holding him back, right? So he wants to go away, right? He is pointed outward. So again, counterbalance that. You have to have somebody who is away pointed back, right? And that's Hector's framework. He is as far away from home as he could possibly be, and all he wants is to get back home. He has already realized that the folly of his youth of traveling and being a musician and chasing whatever fame was too much. The cost of it was too much, and he just wanted to get back to his family. So much so that when he threatened to leave De La Cruz and say, I don't want this anymore. I need to go back to my family. De La Cruz murdered him, right? So Hector has been on a decades-long, generations-long quest to get back home. And so I feel like you get those two people together, and you come up with some kind of handshake agreement, like, I'll help you do this if you help me do that, and then you're kind of off to the races. So I guess I remember that first summer when we were kind of putting the big story together, I remember pitching, like, and then it turns out he's the grandpa, right? Right. And they were like, what? I was like, trust me, like, we can do this. We can really do this. And there was a lot of, they put a lot of faith in me as I went off to write the first draft, that we could pull that big a switcheroo on people, 3/4 of the way into the film. But I was like, we can do this. We can do, like, I knew in my bones that that's the perfect sort of launch into third act reversal that this movie would need to, because there's so many things. People talk about the midpoint a lot. I am less excited about midpoints they're less exciting to me. I think the turn into the third act has a lot more riding on it. And so that third act turn in Coco, like, if you sit there and do the math, like, there's a lot that happens in a very short period of time. I mean, you have a changing the hand of who's the villain, right? So suddenly it's not the great grandmother or the great great grandmother, it's De La Cruz. This guy who is a stranger turns out to be a family member. This kid who started the film by saying, I don't want to be in this family anymore, says, I'm proud to be in this family. So it's the thing that was chasing you is now flying you to freedom. Like there's so many reversals in that, like, 8-minute chunk that I think is what sort of gets everybody going for the third act of the film.
And in terms of that story math, once you work out that's your turn, do you then have to go back to the first act and add in lots of things that kind of, I guess, kind of put the viewer on one trajectory in terms of what they think the film is going to be? Like, when I was watching it, obviously knowing the ending as you do after seeing it the first time, like, there are some really specific things that are being leveraged in that first act. For example, there's that great scene in which, like, Miguel is he's in his like little secret hideaway with his guitar cobbled together from nails and strings and things he's found around the village. And it's so pure, and I think like the purity of his adoration for Dela Cruz in that scene, it really does make you think you're going to watch a film in which the antagonists are the people who are suppressing his passion for what he wants to do. Like the bait and switch is really impressive. Is that stuff that you go back and add in, or kind of reinforce once you know where you're going with the third act?
Full stop. Yeah, you said it perfectly. It's a bait and switch. So you need the bait, right? That's the first part. You got to bait people into thinking they're going to watch a movie about one thing. And in some ways, you have to bait yourself. You have to be like, I'm going to write a movie about a kid who all he wants to do. Like we kept talking about, like we kept in a way to sort of not get lost in our particular story, but like to back up and look at it from 30,000 feet. We were like, okay, what about a story where, and there was a movie about this called Heartbreak Hotel from the late 80s or early 90s. And we're like, it was about a kid who discovers his biological father is Elvis, right? But by then Elvis had died. I think it was messy. It's a messy film. But we were like, what if a kid figures out his biological father is Elvis, and he goes off to meet Elvis, and he meets Elvis? Like that would be great. And so you sort of you have to trick yourself into just writing that movie, knowing in the back of your mind that Elvis is gonna be a horrible person, who's going to murder you before you have a chance to leave and tell the tale. You have to write as if there is no switch. You have to convince yourself even that there is no switch. There's another project that I've been working on for the last year or so. That it was funny. I was writing this story, writing the screenplay. Everything's going according to plan, and then about, again, 3/4 of the way through, I had this idea for a secondary character that was complete switcheroo. And I was like, oh, that's too good. That's too good not to put in. I have to put it in. It totally surprised me. And I was like, now I got to go back and lay track for all of it. But I look back and I'm like, oh, I don't. Actually, I don't have to lay track for this. I can just do, because I was convinced of this character's trajectory. And yes, maybe I put in a little Easter egg here and there, but there's a risk in the baiting. There's a risk of becoming too obvious. And I think that's a calibration that you have to. One of the things that I tell people when they rewatch Coco is I say, watch Dante. Dante is telling you the answer to the movie the entire time. All he is trying to do throughout the entire movie is get Miguel and Hector in the same room together. That's all he's doing. And once he accomplishes that, he's chill. And then when they separate, he freaks out. That's all he's trying to do. So just watch the movie through Dante's eyes, and it is as obvious as you could possibly make it.
I love that.
That was our little like secret decoder ring. And it's why that when they finally come together, Dante finally gets his wings, like Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life. He becomes a full-fledged spirit animal when he finally, makes his first connection.
That's so beautiful. I'd never noticed that before, but
oh yeah. Well, there you go. I gave you the answer. You peeked at the answer key.
Tell me this, Matt. Like your approach to the Land of the Dead, like this whole segment of the film, like the color of it, the vibrancy, the momentum of it's all remarkable. Can you talk me through, the evolution of how you approached all this material? I guess I'm especially curious as to how you landed on the kind of brilliant ticking clock device of Miguel kind of needing a family blessing to return to the living world before sunrise, or he's going to remain in the land of the dead forever. You visualize that through him slowly becoming skeletal himself, kind of like Back to the Future. Like it has that great, really easy to understand visual key. Was that stuff all fairly immediate, or did it take a lot of iterating to arrive at those ideas?
That took all the stuff about production design and rules rules. I mean, we would spend weeks having meetings about rules, the rules of the land of the dead. And, okay, so he's going to disappear, or is he going to disappear? Is he going to turn into a skeleton? Or does, like, when he looks down at his hand, like, what does he see? Is it like a cross section, like a steak? Like, is that, there was a lot of at Pixar, you sometimes find yourself kind of in these eddies of these like crazy philosophical discussions about, I mean, you can imagine sort of when you're talking about the rules of the land of the dead, or the rules of the inside of a young girl's brain, or the rules of not the afterlife but the pre-life, or the rules of like what happens when fire and water touch. You get drawn into these conversations, and they're wonderful, and they kind of, you walk out a little bit dizzier than you walked in. um, but that's where, like, again, the machinery, and not, I don't mean that pejoratively, the machinery of Pixar is such that like everything is done in-house. All the production design, all the animation, all the character design, everything is done in-house. Everybody's talking to everybody at all the time. And so when you have this deep philosophical discussion about what would it look like, that's when Harley Jessup and his team would come up with 10 options of what that would look like. And that gives you another idea that you go, oh, wait, if we did that, then we can move this over here and do that and talk about that here instead of there. And then they go, oh, that gives us an idea. And then that's the snowball that starts happening. And then that's why I say, like, it's really hard to say, like, that was mine, that was his, that was hers. Like, it's impossible, because it's all part of the same sort of whirling tornado of ideas that exist, that we try to like keep going as these films kind of take their years to gestate.
We touched on the ending of the film earlier, and noted how that had been something in there from the very beginning, a unicorn scene, as you called it, Matt. Did you know that it was going to have the power that it would? Like, or rather, what are your theories as to why it hits as hard as it does?
It hit hard, I'm sure you know the Pixar process, or animation process in general, where they sort of put the reels up, sort of hand-drawn version of the film. So at that first screening, the reels played, and people were crying. People cried even at the table read. We sort of knew that it was going to be powerful. I'll tell you when I knew it was going to be powerful was when I first heard the song. So Bobby Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, the husband-wife team that wrote the song, they're the ones behind Frozen, and Bobby wrote Book of Mormon and Avenue Q, and like like an amazing songwriting team. And we had this story, and I gave them a very tall order. I said, I need a song that is going to be sung 3 times in the film. It has to be sung like a big Vegas, Viva Las Vegas show number. It has to be sung acoustically to a little girl, and then it has to be sung by a little kid to an old woman. So it can't be too rangy. It has to be universal. It has to be like, I gave them all of these things that they were like, okay, but then like a couple weeks later, they sent the first demo of Remember Me. And I wept at I listened to the audio file, and I was at my desk, and I wept. I was like, this is the most beautiful song I've heard. Like, I was floored. And I couldn't wait to plug it in to the script and the story. And so that's when I knew that there was something. It was when I first heard the song. Everything else doesn't surprise. It still gets me when I watch the film. It still gets me. That song still gets me.
Well, it got everyone, and the power of that moment and the power of this film in general, I can only imagine what it meant to you and the Pixar team, to everyone who worked on this film, that it was striking such a chord at the moment in American history that it was. So the kind of context for Coco, the film came out in a time of fairly monstrous, yeah, anti.
Context for Coco was rough. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for any listeners who need reminding, this was a time in which, stadiums were full of Americans chanting "Build that wall" at Trump rallies as the film was being finished and then released. You know, Trump at the time was saying Hispanic people were drug dealers, criminals, rapists, and I'm curious, like, what it meant to be able to tell a story that humanized Mexican people at that time and showed their culture in all its vibrancy, like the stakes that context added to the release and to the telling of this film must have been quite extraordinary.
That was certainly not the aim. We started the movie in peaceful times. We started making a movie because it felt like a great story to tell, and what an animation friendly idea, and what a great thing. And we can make music, and we can, like, it there was just nothing but fun that we were trying to have. And then as we're rounding third, right, like we're heading into a world or in America anyway, we're heading into an America that is incredibly hostile, or that is a part of America that's becoming incredibly hostile. I think, look, we definitely knew the entire time that an American team of filmmakers at an American film company making a film about Mexico with an entirely Mexican cast, and about a Mexican holiday was like, we had to do it right, or else we knew the stakes of that. And we brought on every kind of, we had panels of people who were helping us all along the way at every stage of development, reading every draft of the script, watching every set of reels, internal teams and external teams. I honestly, like, the idea of like cultural consultants was not a thing when we started this film. We were doing that before it became a thing in Hollywood, because it was the right thing to do, because we knew we had to nail it. And so, yeah, kind of getting to release this film in a time when, I remember, I don't know, it was so many emotions going on at that time. I don't know if that was the first and foremost on my mind, but I do remember at the premiere, I was doing the press line, and I finally got to the Fox News station, and this reporter asked me a question that was something along the lines of like, why did you make this movie about Mexican people? Like, what? And yeah, I was really pissed, and I gave a really I gave an answer that I think was diplomatic as could be, but I told her to go, you know, take a flying leap, basically, with that question. I don't know what I said, because I kind of blacked out a little bit, because it was a heightened experience. And I've since tried to find what I said, but they never aired it. So it's somewhere in the archives. I think I like to think I spiked the ball back over the net. And that's why they didn't air it, but maybe it's because I was, like this. So yeah, it was, I feel like, especially movies at Pixar that take so long, you can't control when the movie, like what the world's going to be like when the movie comes out. You have no way of knowing. And so you just try to make something that will be good no matter when it comes out. We weren't, I personally wasn't trying to be timely or make a political statement or anything like that. But I guess I knew in my heart of hearts that representation, it obviously matters, but also the kind of representation matters. It's like, no, we're not going to make, as you said, I wrote a movie about Pablo Escobar. I wrote that movie. I was not interested in writing movies that sort of showcase the worst of us anymore. And I try to still do that.
Well, that's an interesting segue into your career since Coco, Matt. Yeah, talk me through like where you're at in the kind of post Coco landscape of things. Like you were announced as the creative architect of Narnia for Netflix in 2019. What's that project been like? I'm aware that Greta Gerwig might be involved. Is there anything you can tell me about that?
Yeah, I worked on that for about a year and a half, and then I'm not working on that anymore. Yeah, that was a um, that was a that was an uphill that was some uphill sledding on for my part. I will say that the yeah, I hate using the words creative differences because it always sounds like a smokescreen for something, but it was creative differences. Like I had a very specific idea about what I wanted to do with the Narnia material. You know, I had laid out for them sort of a strategy of film and series as a way to adapt the 7 books in a way that was both sort of respectful but also not precious, you know, and try to sort of update them in some fun ways. And ultimately, that's not the direction Netflix wanted to go. You know, so I'm not the person to ask what's happening with Narnia. Um, it's funny. It's like since Coco, I've had, you know, it obviously opened a lot of doors, and that's both wonderful and maddening because I work on things that I'm not allowed to talk about now. That's all, like I can only obliquely talk about what I work on. And so, yeah, for all the time that I was on Narnia, we were on complete lockdown, so I couldn't really tease anybody with what we were up to or, you know, what things were going on. And same now, I get to work with, you know, amazing people doing super creative projects. I get to do it from my little office here in Oakland, and I can't talk about it. But I can, you know, but hopefully one of these rocks that we're pushing uphill will get it over the top, and then we can come back on and talk about it some more. You know.
It's okay. When your mum comes on the show next week, I'll get all the secrets out of her.
She knows everything I'm working on. And she is definitely that is the lever to work on. Yeah.
Oh, well, Matt, whatever it is you're working on next, I can't wait to see it because I've adored all your work till now. And yeah, Coco especially has a massive place in my heart. So thank you for making the film and thank you for this conversation today.
I appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, it's humbling. It's still honestly like to see how this movie has the life that it's gone on to have is pretty. I'm a proud papa.
You've been listening to Script Apart. Thank you so much for tuning in. A reminder that if you want to help the show continue to grow, you can join us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/scriptapart or clicking the link in today's show notes. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.